Lex ain't dead. I seen him creeping in the alley last night near the playground.
Everybody know Lex is dead.
Nah, there's dead and there's special dead.
Yeah, Chris working that juju shit.
Nah, man. What I'm saying is they zombies. Why you think he take them in the vacants? He need time to change them. You don't believe me, yo, it's on you.
Yo, they funny, ain't they, Michael?
I don't know about that voodoo shit, man. But Chris is definitely doing something. Get a nigga to walk up and out knowing he about to get cat, man.
Chris Partlo is widely regarded as one of the most chilling, as well as mysterious enforcers on The Wire. He's one of two characters on the show who actually managed to get the drop on Omar Little. Not via luck, however, but rather sheer skill. One may even argue that he was the most chilling as well as skillful enforcer, seeing as though nobody aside from Omar dared go after Marlo whilst Chris Partlo was about. However, I would argue that another soldier, assuming you can even call this man that, was just as chilling and skillful as Partlo, as where Chris had the corner boys and small-time dealers shaken, this man had the likes of Proposition Joe and Avon Barksdale trembling, and that man is no other than Brother Mouzone.
He say he's still trying to find us a better connect. And for muscle, he's saying he's sending us the best he can find. Brother Mouzone.
You don't think I'm gonna send any of my people up against Brother? Shit. That nigga got more bodies on him than a Chinese cemetery.
Now, the conditions for this battle are as so. Slim and Joe, assuming they even can, have gotten word out to Brother Mouzone in an attempt to fix a little problem. That problem being Marlo, who they fear is trying to go around the co-op and cut them out from the Greek connection. Brother arrives in Baltimore alongside Lamar. However, because Marlo seemingly has little connection to NYC, he and Chris Partlo have no idea that there's a contract killer out gunning for them. And so we're left with a question or two. Could Brother Mouzone take out Marlo and Chris Partlo before Marlo and Partlo secure the Greek and take out Joe? If either Chris or Marlo were to get word that Brother was after them, would the dynamic of hunter and hunted be flipped on its head? And would Brother be able to survive the onslaught if he was no longer the hunter? Now, before we try to solve this puzzle, we first have to understand what it is that makes these two so good at what they do. You see, Chris Partlo is such a fearful enforcer, because not only has he gotten credit for the murder of Stringer Bell, somebody many deemed untouchable, but also because nobody ever sees what happens to those who cross Chris Partlo. And because of such, there's this aura of mystique surrounding his character, that extra layer of uncertainty, is where the likes of a bird or a weebay just shoot somebody and leave them out to dry. Chris Partlo approaches them in this calm and friendly manner, convinces them to follow him to their own burial site, and then behind a closed door completely disappears them, never to be seen again. Add on top the fact that the average player rarely ever lays eyes on Chris Partlo. They only ever hear about those he's sent 6 feet under. And so imagine the terror one might feel the night they actually see this Grim Reaper. I would argue that such mystique is why everybody just willingly follows him to their own doom. Your death is now inevitable. You've been visited by the Grim Reaper.
I ain't done nothing lately to piss you off, right? Right?
Brother Mouzone is somewhat similar, as his fear also comes not necessarily from what people see him do, but rather what they've heard he's done. However, where Chris's fear and mystique comes from these exaggerated horror stories told by the likes of Naaman and Michael, Mouzone's fear derives from who it is telling the story. Not some kids in a dark alley, but rather kingpins like Joe Stringer and Avon, characters who we know are terrifying in their own right. One may even argue that Brother Mouzone is like the John Wick of The Wire. We're gonna trust that he's a dangerous individual, simply because his name alone sends a shiver down the spines of very powerful people. Now, to answer the question of, could Mouzone take Chris and Marlo out before they learn that he's onto them? I truthfully believe that such is a possibility, as where the likes of Omar could only ever follow Marlo or his people around, and just sort of pray that the right opening would eventually come. Mouzone potentially has somebody who could tell him when Marlo and Chris are not only gonna be, but also when they'll be at their most vulnerable. And that somebody is Vincent, somebody who we know has ties to Mouzone, and somebody who, perhaps like Avon, Mouzone could threaten so to get the whereabouts of Chris and Marlo. However, to say that Vincent would give up Marlo isn't concrete, as frankly we don't know the extent of his and Mouzone's relationship, meaning that Mouzone might not have something he could hold over Vincent's head, like he did Avon. Prop Joe could also be another avenue when it comes to getting a location on Marlo, as it was after all Joe who told Omar about the card game, and if Omar wanted to, he could have killed Marlo there and then. However, Mouzone's goal for the sake of this video is to take out both Marlo and Chris Partlo, and so to kill Marlo here would be rather stupid, as such would alert Partlo and completely switch the roles of hunter and hunted. But let's assume that Mouzone does kill Marlo, as such is definitely a possibility, seeing as though both Omar and Slim managed to find themselves in a position where taking out Marlo was possible. The question now switches to, would Brother Mouzone be able to survive if he were the one being hunted by Chris Partlo? And the answer to this question is rather tricky, as the likes of Omar was able to get the drop on Mouzone and had the chance to kill him. However, such was only possible due to Mouzone getting betrayed by the people who hired him. And I would like to think that Mouzone has learnt from his encounter with Omar, and is now smart enough to know that giving his location up to anybody, including the people who hired him, would be stupid. As was to say that Chris doesn't just track Joe down and torture Mouzone's location out of him. Assuming of course Chris could even get to Joe, as with Marlo gone, he now wouldn't have cheese to manipulate for a location on his uncle, essentially saying that Chris would have little to no chance when it came to tracking Mouzone down. However, what are the chances that Brother Mouzone would be able to track Chris Partlo down? We know that Chris is incredibly wary of his location, once he knows he's on the defensive end of the hunt. Take for example the time he snapped at Snoop after she told him they should see his family, knowing that Omar Little was after them. Partlow actually understood that he was never going to get a location on somebody like Omar, and that his only option was to bring the predator to him. Let Omar think that he's got the drop on Partlow, when actually it's quite the opposite. And he could do something similar with Mouzone, use the likes of Snoop as bait, and take Mouzone out once he falls for whatever trap Partlow has set. Now, such I feel is one of few paths to victory when it comes to Chris Partlo, as Mouzone is simply better connected, and so it's going to be easier for Mouzone to track Chris and his people down than it would be for Chris to track Mouzone down. However, that isn't to say that Brother Mouzone is a clear winner here, as frankly he isn't. Tracking down Chris is going to be of similar difficulty than say tracking down Omar, especially once Chris realises that he's no longer the hunter. And so Mouzone's clearest path to victory would be getting to Chris whilst he's still unaware that anybody's even after him. Perhaps he sits on the rim shop similar to how Slim did in Season 3, and just waits until Chris and Marlo are alone. Or perhaps he uses somebody whom he knows Marlo wants taken out. He follows that person until Chris and Snoop eventually get to him, and there is when he takes his shot. But ultimately, there are more paths to victory for Mouzone than there are for Chris Partlo. Now that isn't to say that Mouzone is more skillful, rather as mentioned he's just far better connected. There are going to be more people Mouzone can go to get a location on Partlo than Partlo can to get a location on Brother. And such is what I feel this comes down to. Who's going to be faster when it comes to getting the drop on the other?
That's far enough. Drop your laundry and turn slowly.
Yo, Chris, I didn't, yo.
It's good.